Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Leaders in Conversation, Economic Development and Prosperity, Empowering Social Change. I'm Stephen Collins. I'm a Pitta man, and I manage Aboriginal engagement here for the Parliament in New South Wales. I'm also your moderator today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging we meet on Gadigal country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I want to celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands of and waters of New South Wales. I acknowledge the various lands of those joining us online today, and I also want to acknowledge and pay my respects to all Aboriginal people joining us. I always reflect on the importance of acknowledging country in this place, and this is the place that created legislation that controlled every aspect of an Aboriginal person's life, where they could live, where they could travel, if they could work, to name a few. But I also reflect on how amazing it is that we can come together in such a place and talk about matters of importance, such as today's discussion. I want to acknowledge our hosts, the Honourable Matthew Mason Cox, President of the Legislative Council, and who I'll invite shortly to say a few words, and also the Honourable Jonathan O'Dea MP, Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, who will be joining us shortly, but he's currently on chair duties. Would you like to come up and say a few words, Mr. President? Thank you.
Look, thank you very much, Stephen, and it's wonderful to see such a crowd here today. And I also, at the outset, acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and certainly pay my respects to their elders past and present. It's wonderful to have you here. I understand there are hundreds online, which is terrific. Nothing like having technology on your side, I say. And it's a very, very important conversation we're having with some key leaders, not just in our parliamentary community, but in our wider, I would call, organisational, corporate and entrepreneurial community, which I think is a very important part of this conversation. So I know that Stephen will be introducing them formally, but I can't resist to say hello to my good friend Ben Franklin, Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, and David as well has joined us, the Opposition Shadow Minister. So look, together with Deb and Claire, I think it will be a very, very interesting panel. Can I just say that in the range of sort of consultations we've been undertaking for a range of areas, including the bicentenary, the biggest feedback when I travel around New South Wales is just how do we plug into the system that we currently have in play to ensure the economic empowerment of local communities. And it's something that I think is at the heart of reconciliation. It's at the heart of actually making a really significant difference in those communities across New South Wales. So I personally am very, very excited to have such a heavyweight group of people here to discuss these issues today. Very much looking forward to that discussion. And so with those few words, I might just ask Stephen to formally introduce the panellists. Thank you, Stephen.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. President. And again, welcome everyone. And today we'll be unpacking economic development and prosperity and what does it mean. Demand for Aboriginal businesses, services and employees has never been greater, but how do we support community to meet this demand? When I think economic development and prosperity, for me, it's really having the financial security to provide for my family. I grew up on welfare. I had no idea of financial literacy. I had no idea of work ethic. And it wasn't without its challenges. And while these are things that I had to learn the hard way, I'm actually excited that we have our panellists here today to, I guess, talk about some of the great work and that's happening to address some of these challenges. I could keep talking, but as the moderator, I've got the hardest job to keep my mouth shut and keep the conversation going. So I'd like to begin by asking our panellists to introduce themselves and really tell us, what does economic development and prosperity look like to you? And we'll start with the Honourable Ben Franklin, Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. Thank you.
I've done this before. There we are. Thanks very much, Stephen. And can I also start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're all meeting today, the Gadigal people, and to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to thank them for their custodianship of this land for many tens of thousands of years, land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm incredibly lucky to have the portfolio of Aboriginal Affairs alongside some other portfolios, tourism, the arts and regional youth, all of which actually have a really nice synchronicity together. In my Aboriginal Affairs portfolio, I interact obviously and regularly with local Aboriginal land councils, other landowning organisations which provide essential housing and infrastructure and economic services to Aboriginal communities throughout this state. To me, you ask what economic development and prosperity means. It means something very simple, and that's fiscal independence. It requires, I think, that all individuals and all communities have the resources and the self-determination to make their own choices about what's economically important to them and what their financial priorities are in their everyday lives. Gone are the days when government says to Aboriginal people, we know best, and we're going to tell you how you should live your lives. So what we're trying to do as a government, whether that's through a range of initiatives like we've started Aboriginal business roundtables, we've developed an Aboriginal procurement policy, we've got a range of different grants and programs. We can talk about those as we go through. But the most important thing is to enhance self-determination and to invest into generational wealth that can transfer through the generations so that Aboriginal people can become truly self-sufficient and independent in this state. That's certainly my aim, and that's what I'm trying to do every day.
Great, thank you so much, Minister. Claire.
Oh goodness. You hit the nail on the head there, Minister, with the word self-determination. The President and I were speaking before about people having first world problems, not third world problems. So self-determination does exactly that. Many people in the state of New South Wales, or indeed in Australia, are living currently with third world problems. And what I mean by that is the struggle of, do I have enough food to put on the table? Am I feeling ashamed right now? Am I skipping a meal because I'm a mother and I need to feed my child? And first world problems looks exactly like my kids have too many universities to choose from. They have far too many choices. The biggest problem in the day of the life of a child, as far as I'm concerned, should be perhaps their mobile phone battery runs out too fast. So that looks like first world problems to me. And so economic prosperity and development, yes, jobs, jobs, jobs has always been the line in the political world. But what it actually means to me is that self-determination and the ability to say, this is what I'm going to do, and actually I can make that choice. I have the support to make that choice, whether it's from my family or with the job that I'm choosing for. I'm not restricted to going into that job because of my disability, or because of the colour of my skin, or because of my gender. And I think New South Wales during COVID in particular, we do a lot of the heavy lifting. So, you know, not just we've got a really good state of origin team, but we're very, very good at doing the heavy lifting for economy. And we learnt that if we failed, Australia would possibly fail. So what economic prosperity and determination means to me is all of us lifting together for the betterment of all people. So yes, it has a First Nations focus in this conversation, but what I really want to say is that if we all lift, we have better hospitals, we have better roads, we have better schools, we have better health, we are less likely to see incarceration, we're less likely to see reoffending, we're less likely maybe to see things like domestic violence. We're less likely to see the things that come when you don't have self-determination and you feel like the system is doing something to you, or you feel not empowered. So to me, this conversation is not just about First Nations people having self-determination. We are amazing and we are always here, always have been, always will be. But if we all live together, then the state of New South Wales has self-determination, and that flows into Australia. And pretty soon, we have a very happy and healthy nation.
Thank you so much. Deb.
Thank you, Claire. Hi everyone, Deb Barwick. I'm the CEO of the New South Wales Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, and I also chair a national network of chambers under a peak body called the First Australians Chamber of Commerce and Industry. In New South Wales, the Indigenous Chamber of Commerce represents around 500 Indigenous businesses, majority Aboriginal-owned and controlled, and nationally our network of chambers represent about 4,500 enterprises across the country. I'm a Gamilaroi woman, a proud Gamilaroi woman from a little place called Bora Crossing. And I'm really, really proud to be here today and to have the opportunity to provide some and to inform, I guess, the process around what we can all do together to drive strong economic outcomes for our communities. For us, we always talk about supporting the best thing that we can do for Indigenous communities is to support the aspirations of any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person or group or family to operate a business. It doesn't matter what that looks like. To them, it's economic development. So if it's mowing lawns in the local town, if it's running a butcher shop or a hairdressing salon, or if it's being a major supplier on government contracts, it's all economic development to our people. Economic development, I guess the end goal in our view is where our people don't need to leave their communities and they don't need to leave regions to find economic development and economic prosperity. Currently, there's a lot of work to be done in regional New South Wales. We had these amazing levers such as the APP, state and federal policies, we have reconciliation action plans, and all of that's driving and building a huge $1 billion wave of opportunity for Aboriginal businesses and Aboriginal communities. But the issue that we see through our work at the grassroots level is that we're not meeting that wave of opportunity by building capacity at the grassroots level so that we can actually take advantage of the opportunity and maximise the impact of it. Sustainability is the other thing that the Chamber focuses on, is not short wins, working with businesses and working with community to understand procurement, to understand what does it mean to put together a competitive tender and how can they do that so that they are actually having or they do have an equal opportunity to access contracts that are available through policies such as the APP. So we work really hard. We have a team that focuses on that in building the capability of our businesses so that they are competitive businesses in the marketplace and in the industries that they serve, so that it's about them being successful long term and that the impact of their success is sustained for the benefit of our communities and our young people coming through.
Great, thank you so much, Deb. David, last but not least.
Thank you. I'm David Harris. I'm the member for Wyong, the Shadow Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and Treaty, and also have the portfolio of jobs, investment and tourism. So quite a few crossovers to do in the Aboriginal economic affairs space. My background is that I was a primary school teacher, and I started my career in the Riverina in a place called Griffith, and I moved to another place called Merriwagga, and then to Hillston with my first 3 appointments, and worked with young Aboriginal people there and families in those communities, which grew inside me a very strong passion for improving outcomes for First Nations people, which I still hold very strongly today. So I acknowledge that we do meet on Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation, and also acknowledge that my electorate and my home is on Dark and Young country up on the Central Coast. Look, the other speakers have really raised the importance of this topic. When we look at closing the gap, the single greatest factor for closing the gap is economic independence. There's no doubt about that at all. It not just creates economic independence for those people now, but it can also create generational economic independence, which can go on through opportunities in education for young people to move on to all sorts of different careers. Last week I was here in the Parliament and was honoured to meet the scholarship students currently going through the University of New South Wales, young doctors, engineers, bankers, and one exceptional young lady who has the dream of becoming the first First Nations astronaut. And they've been able to do that because they have come from quite difficult backgrounds, particularly regional New South Wales, but through support have been able to reach their dreams. And clearly we've got some really good policies, and I acknowledge the work the current government's done and the federal government in terms of recognising the great opportunities that First Nations economic development has, not just for Aboriginal people, but for our nation, not just internally, but also internationally. And it's really exciting. And you can probably tell from my voice, I get quite excited about it as I move around the state and meet entrepreneurs and businesses that are taking the hard yards and forging their way in this space. So I think as a parliament, as a community, as a state and nation, we have to make sure that we can grow those opportunities and benefit our whole community, and something that we can be proud of as a nation, and also make sure that we are, as Claire said, moving from those third world problems to having those less intense first world problems. So very interested in the discussion today. I talk particularly to the Indigenous Business Chamber and hear some great ideas, and I want to be able to, together with the government, forge opportunities. This space has to be bipartisan. It's everybody's business, and it's particularly a business where we have to walk together with community, and as Ben said, it's not about government coming up with solutions, it's about supporting community-led solutions.
Can I just add something very quickly?
No,
and that is just
fantastic.
to set the tone right from the start. I agree with David. So, two things. One, I want to acknowledge David and the genuine respect that he's held in community, and his genuine heart and passion in this area. It's actually lovely having government and opposition who both share a really common and united purpose on this, and I want to publicly acknowledge and pay credit to that. The second point I just want to pick up was the closing the gap point, which of course is utterly critical. At a federal level, of course, all the states were brought together to determine what the priority reforms were going to be under closing the gap, and there were 4 that were agreed to across the country. In New South Wales, of course, again in a bipartisan way, we've added a 5th, which is a economic priority reform on employment, business growth and economic prosperity, to highlight exactly the point that David just made about the importance of this space.
Great. Thank you so much, Minister. And look, Deb, you were touching on, obviously, people having to leave community and leave country, and I guess, and that's a barrier for some people. I guess what tools are needed to build, I guess, economic development and prosperity in community, within communities?
It's a number of things. So obviously, you know, we're a prosperous state, and there are a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of infrastructure works going on across the state of New South Wales. Quite often, projects go in and out of communities, and the opportunities are missed. And so what we believe needs to happen is we need to get in front of the opportunities, in front of that wave coming into communities, and we need to find out what capacity is needed in order for our businesses and our community to take up opportunities that are coming to town, so that they're not having to leave their communities for jobs in the cities and what have you. Look, it's the same in sport. You know, our young people are snapped up by NRL clubs and the like, but they're very lonely, you know, and they can't wait to get back home. And quite often, you know, they leave that opportunity. And I guess what we'd like to see from an economic point of view is where we focus on regions and we focus on building the economic opportunity in those communities so that people can stay and work in their community. Capacity building. If we could get in there and actually work with our Aboriginal community organisations, for example, and Aboriginal businesses and entrepreneurs, and really build their capacity to win work in a competitive sense, so that they are the ones that are delivering on contracts in their regions. I think we can do that a whole lot better.
Yeah, fantastic. Claire?
Stephen, I'll admit that my team are here today and I've shamed them by not introducing myself properly. So I'll say Gupagaka Yorta Yorta Waka Ingatha Claire. It always settles me down to acknowledge country and language. I'm a proud Yorta Yorta woman. My name is Claire, but my totem is a long-necked turtle. My team are going to laugh now because they know I say it, but it means I stick my neck up for mob and I've got a bloody hard shell if you want to have a crack. And today, of course, we're meeting on the wonderful land that is Gadigal. So I'm delighted as a public servant of over 24 years to see a bipartisan approach. Can I just call you both out for that? I've met both of you now, and the Minister knows the first time I met him, I taught him a word called gammon, and I asked him if he was gammon, which means, not really the real deal. And to me, I'm very upfront about these things. I'm a proud black woman, and I'm here to do real things for the people of New South Wales and for my people, and neither one of you are gammon. So thank you for talking about self-determination and opening the floor to talking about this in reality and saying you'll walk together, because that's what we need. We need to stop the politics, because we're never going to close the gap if we're against each other. We need all of us to stand together strong, shoulder to shoulder. I think like the Greek phalanx, we're shoulder to shoulder, we're impenetrable. If we can do this and stand up for the state of New South Wales and for our First Nations people, even state by state. In terms of what we need to do, you probably picked up that I'm very authentic. So a policy is a policy, and that's fantastic, but a policy without implementation in true co-design is nothing. And for the various longest time, we've had things done to us, not with us, and we are where we are now. And as a result of that, it's funny when people say, we're going to go and help X community, and people make it worse, because they never asked aunties and uncles and the people who actually live there what could be done to help, because 99.9%, if not 100% of the time, they know the answer. So I've been really blessed in my career to actually do real things for real people and see real stuff, whether it's delivering tunnels or building schools. And what I'm really happy about is, since I arrived in school infrastructure in the Department of Education, I'm an executive director there, I have seen not the APIC policy, but what we call the APII policy, Aboriginal Participation in Infrastructure. Because if you broaden it, as Deb just said, it is about men and women, or people from non-binary identification, moving from job to job to job, leaving country, suffering post-traumatic stress, coming back to a home that isn't together anymore, coming back to a community that doesn't feel that they belong to it, chances are, anymore, and all sorts of behaviours come from that, whether it be domestic violence or alcoholism or even just not belonging. That is depression. So if you think about Aboriginal participation in infrastructure, and I'll move to the traineeship in a moment that we've developed, it is about not just jobs on the tools. It could be apprenticeships, but it's also jobs in offices. It's procurement, which we need everywhere. It's business, it's project management that we need everywhere. We have the largest investment in infrastructure that we're probably ever going to see. Why aren't we thinking about broadening APIC into infrastructure? And targets alone, we know, solve nothing. If you look at a pothole, you're going to hit it, right? So 10%, maybe you set an easy target, maybe you hit it, you're going to high-five yourself. Maybe it wasn't the thing you needed to do. But for us, with the infrastructure traineeship that we've developed out of a response to COVID, we heard that 85,000 kids in the state of New South Wales were finishing Year 12, and we heard that a third of them were predicted to be unemployed for the rest of their lives. And when I heard that, my heart fell through my chair, and I thought, not on my watch. I am not creating the next generation of unemployed, the next generation of welfare. I'm not continuing the story of welfare for some families. We know some kids actually were working night shifts at Coles because their parents lost their jobs in maybe travel industries. So we needed to live for them. The young people needed the old people, right? And as a good auntie, I'm not one yet, but maybe one day, we stepped in. And as government, we stood shoulder to shoulder, no matter the agency, and we put money from our own, buckets of money for our own staffing, to develop this traineeship that allows young people who finish Year 12, when they don't know what they want to be when they grow up, that's okay, neither do I, they find out during the 2 years being paid, being qualified in a Cert 4 in business, procurement or project management, all transferable. If you don't like infrastructure, you'll still find a job. They are safe with us for 2 years. They rotate between government, contractors and consultants. What that means is they meet employers that could give them a job, or they get recognised prior learning into apprenticeship, or they find their way into university, because we introduce them to university. Maybe no one in their family's ever gone to university. So to me, I talk to schools now and I say, what kids do you currently have that don't know what they want to be when they grow up? You're dragging them through Year 12, kicking and screaming. They're always late, or they seem to always have an excuse for why they're not there. I want them, because I know I can get them to use their talents for good instead of evil. So real programs, real results. We do continuous improvement. We're continuously looking from the kids to make it better. So we're doing true co-design. So these little projects all built together build economic prosperity for the next generation. We have kids whose family have never worked before. They're the first generation. we have one amazing young boy who's blind, and he brings his dog and cane, who thought he couldn't be in infrastructure because that was a barrier. We're breaking the back of that. But out of that, these kids are going to be paying taxes. And so when I'm old, I'll have a decent nursing home to live into. There's a little bit of selfishness there. But to me, self-determination for them means self-determination for me too. So it's that circle of life. And now we don't have enough people in infrastructure. So once upon a time, the young people needed the old people. Now the old people need the young people. So I'm into real projects that enforce policy.
Fantastic. I mean, the meaningful opportunities and I guess how we create those, it's such a fantastic... I could listen to you all day.
Thank you,
Talk
Stephen.
about the program. Minister.
Yeah, look, I guess I'd say a couple of things. Based on what you actually rightly say, Claire, which is about actual outcomes. Words are great, that's an important start, but outcomes are more important. So we've got the highest concentration of Aboriginal businesses in the country in New South Wales. That's fantastic. But what does that mean? We look at, for example, the procurement policy that the New South Wales government has, which is important and helpful, but needs to deliver. So I'm really proud that in 2020, 2021, our spend with Aboriginal businesses almost doubled to $174 million. That it engaged 455 Aboriginal businesses, and that almost 4,000 jobs were created. Now, our target was 3,000 jobs. You will rightly say probably, well, that's not enough, and it's not. But we've set a target, we've reached it, and we're now above it. And now we need to look at, right, what's next? What's the new target? What can we do now? And part of that, going back to the point about listening, not telling, we've set up Aboriginal business roundtables, and where we've now brought together a range twice, in October last year and then I want to say April this year, we brought together a number of different Aboriginal businesses to talk about a range of challenges that they've got in terms of genuinely interacting with whether it be government or non-government, and what we can do to assist with that. And so I'm proud of where that's landing, but that requires a full cultural shift from government in terms of how we do business. And it's about constant collaboration and constant engagement, which is what we did in the run-up to this budget, which was to work in partnership with CAPO, with the Coalition of Aboriginal Peak Organisations, to actually, going back to David's point about closing the gap, to draft up 27 specific programs done in collaboration, all fully funded, to look at closing the gap in the 17 different priority areas. So that's the way that we've got to do it in the future, and economic empowerment has to be right at the heart of that.
Fantastic. David?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on a couple of points there around sustainability and around aspiration. Two really important things, particularly for young people. I'll go back to the scholarship dinner the other night. The fact that all of those young people said that when they were at school, their teachers told them to dream low, which is a real shame. They told them why it was too hard for them to become a doctor and they should choose something more realistic. And what we have to learn across all of government, all of society, is that we have to encourage aspiration in young people. It's not just about having pathways, it's about actually having young people understand that everything is possible. And I think that can be very hard. When I was in Merriwagga, which is halfway between Griffith and Hillston, a one-teacher school, and I came from the Central Coast and moved out there, and I took the young people there on an excursion to Wagga, and it just blew me away that for some of them it was the first time at Maya there they'd seen escalators. And I think sometimes as a society we don't actually understand that that young people, even though we've got multimedia and technology and all those things, seeing it and experiencing it are two different things, and we have to make sure that whatever we do, it's about making sure that we encourage that aspiration. But the other key point around that is then sustainability, because one of the mistakes of the past has been programs that have run for limited time. People train up, they become aspirational, and then the program ends or the project moves on, and then they're back to where they were, and that then creates trauma, which for particularly young people looking at the older people kills their aspiration, because they think, what's the point? So in all of our policy work, it has to make sure that things are sustainable, that particularly with infrastructure, which is a great opportunity, as you say, but as those projects move on, and we're looking at inland rail at the moment. I was at Moree recently, and the number of jobs that are currently there in Moree is phenomenal. I think everyone's driving a truck around or has a vest on for the rail company. But that project will end.
Yes.
And then what happens to that community when that ends? And we have to take these opportunities to skill people up so that when those projects move on, they still have a sustainable business. And we have to have a situation where, particularly in our regional communities, and I'm a passionate regional person, that we don't have contracts that have fly in, fly out. We should be developing local workforce that is there for the duration, that understand country, that understand what's happening. And one of the most inspirational things I heard from one of those young people last week was a young woman who started training as a lawyer, but her passion was medicine. And so she's changed over to medicine now, but her dream is to become an obstetrician and allow birth on country. Oh, wow. And they're the sorts of things that we have to look at and encourage. And if we can do that and have those services available in regional areas, then people will stay and their businesses will be successful, and that will become generational change.
Can I pick up on the aspiration point really quickly? One of my favourite expressions is, you can't be what you can't see. And I think it's so important that we ensure that there are Aboriginal people on boards of public companies, of NGOs, to provide exactly that sort of aspirational target, I guess, for young people, so that they know that there is a pathway which is achievable and available to them.
100%.
Yeah, I'll just hone in on David's comments, is that that capacity piece is, you're absolutely right. It's important that when we work with businesses in the regions, in the cities, wherever it is, that it's not reactive to APP, all those large government contracts. We need to work with businesses to be highly competitive in their industry, and then we look at diverse opportunities. You know, the more diverse, the better, as far as sustainability. So we look at local government, we look at state government, Commonwealth, we look at private sector. So it's really about that business being very well equipped to sustain and grow going forward. The other thing that I'd like to really, I guess, talk about in regards to APP is there is an enormous opportunity, and we've been banging on about this for a few years now, is we're not implementing the opportunity that the policy creates to engage Indigenous businesses for products and services up to 250,000. So where you can go direct as long as there's value for money. We're not doing that, we're not seeing that come out of our departments and agencies enough. And that move or shift alone will see a significant growth in those micro, small mums and dads, family-owned businesses in our region. So from a Chamber's point of view, and from the feedback that we get from all of the businesses that we work with, yes, we work with a lot of businesses in infrastructure and construction. We also work with businesses that are those micro mums and dads businesses. And so if we can work with agencies, I guess that's a challenge for government and departments to implement that opportunity within the policy, then we will see much more growth and much more opportunity.
And Aboriginal businesses are the highest employers of Aboriginal people.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we all nod and say absolutely, but I hope the people who are listening and watching understand that, because you don't make a difference in one person's life. You make a difference in generations of lives within that home. And talking about sustainability, so we were talking about programs that make a difference and how sometimes they come and go with governments or come and go with leaders in particular. What I particularly like about some of the programs we have in school infrastructure is they're considered business as usual. So these programs are, yes, made for infrastructure, but I've had other jurisdictions and other industries, IT, health, childcare. I've gone to Queensland. I've gone to Victoria, and they've all asked. And the program is actually on the website for that reason. I want everyone to steal it. Plagiarism is just a good thing. Go and take it and drive it. It's there for your use, but it's there to help. And you can call it a tuna fish sandwich for whatever industry you like, but the program is there and it's solid and it's updated continuously with the feedback we hear from the kids, young people, about their experiences. What do they need? Whether it's extra pastoral care, whether it's mental health first aid in COVID, they're on an LGA of concern, they needed that, we put it in there. Literacy and numeracy. Some of these young people don't have great literacy and numeracy when they start. They certainly don't know what a workplace looks like. I know I didn't when I started. So how do you communicate in the workplace? I've had some of them ring me up on their first day of work and say, what do I wear? One of them was particularly gorgeous and said, I've been watching people come and go off the train and I think I should wear flat shoes and I should wear pants and a blouse. And I said, Bob, that will get you everywhere? Absolutely. But they don't know what they don't know. So the amount of effort and heavy lifting you do for these young people can't be underestimated, but is in the program. It has pastoral care, mentoring, tutoring. They get tutoring within the first couple of weeks to see if they're going to pass a first aid card, a white card. They do all these little micro credentials to see that they're ready before they start. And they have help from a group training organisation, their supervisor, and their buddy in work. So there's many old people they can ask for help if they're feeling too ashamed to ask one particular person. But the sustainability is here. And what I like is when departments like the Department of Education or when the Secretaries Board from all agencies say this is considered business as usual. So it doesn't live and die with a leader, it will be around forever.
Yeah, can I just pick up on that?
Please.
Yeah, really important point around the wraparound services. And we were at the eBiz Global and Barwick, which is one of the local Aboriginal organisations on the Central Coast, employing people at eBiz Global, but they were there supporting the young people. So many of them would start and then find out that that career wasn't for them, and that was okay. But at least they then were able to look at other options. There's incredible thing, and it really blew me away, and it was sort of reinforced through the meeting there, is that young people sometimes think that if they miss a day of work, they're too scared to go back again.
Yeah.
And if there's not someone there to ring them up or pick them up or take them back and say, okay, you've made a mistake, let's go back, let's talk to the boss, let's get through that, then often those barriers that we don't even think about can be so restrictive. So when we look at programs, that's where we should be focusing on, is helping people stay in the workforce, but also creating the skills, the capability that they one day will leave and start their own business. So they're not just going to be necessarily employees, that's important, but that they actually have the skills then through mentoring to then reach out on their own and create their own businesses. And that's a really, really important point, as I'm very passionate about education, but it's one of the areas we don't do well, that we push people out and hope they do okay. And if they haven't had a family history of employment, then often these young people are alone, and they don't know what's expected, how to dress, all of those
How to
those
write a
sorts of
CV.
things. How to write a CV.
These
yeah.
entry-level issues which are taken for granted by so many.
Correct.
Those are the services we need to help provide.
Yes.
Couldn't
How to
agree with you
reply
more.
to an email,
Yeah, exactly.
not in text language.
How to make sure that you alert your employer that you're going on sorry business.
Right, and to that point, it's also, and the heavy lifting is not just on the young person to learn, it's on the employer.
Yeah,
And
I was
we've
gonna make
banged
the same
on
point.
about cultural awareness for so long. I mean, most people in government do an acknowledgement of country. Most people do it badly. They read it off a piece of paper and they rattle it through and they say things like, now to the real stuff.
Yep.
And you think, really? However, those of us who do it well, and I've seen them done well around the table today, it's because you mean it and you know it. We also need to make sure that we are culturally safe. And I know through our careers, we haven't always been culturally safe, and it's become the new thing for people to be more open about it, and that's great. There's also a lot of cultural fatigue that sits on us when we're asked every question known to man. I don't know if white men know all the answers to white men problems. I don't know the answer to every Aboriginal problem.
I heard an expression about that the other day, Black Siri.
Right.
Which is
Right.
like that businesses have one
Right.
Aboriginal person in the
Right.
office who then is the font of all knowledge.
Yes, thank you. Well, I like the phrase new black handbag. I'm like, everyone's new black handbag. You want to carry me around all of a sudden to make yourself legitimate. But for people to be culturally safe and culturally aware is different than just knowing an acknowledgement of country first.
And it's not enough to just write a rap and then put it in the bottom drawer.
Oh,
No.
our rap is a living, breathing document.
Absolutely.
It's worse if you have one and you aren't
Yes.
culturally safe. You know, and some of these kids come on board and they'll say things like, I mean, one of my proudest moments, I'll shame my boss for a second, was we had someone in our team, in the executive team, who'd had someone pass away, and he said, oh, blah, blah's off on sorry business. He is a white Englishman, and he said sorry business. I have never been so proud in my life, you know, because he was speaking our language, he was speaking it to me, he knew that I'd get it, but he didn't understand what it would mean to me for him to say it, you know, and so for us to see people adopting culture, you know, if I hear someone say the word gammon, if I hear those words amongst, or you know, yama, amongst other people, and they do it in a culturally safe way, they're not just throwing it around because that's the new word that they learnt and they want to practice it on everyone. It is a nice feeling, and it's a nice feeling for these young ones too. You know, you do need an Aboriginal capacity in your workforce, yes, because you're representing the customer. Not because it's a nice thing to do, because it's the vibe and you're a good human, it's because you want to represent the customer. So a little bit of everyone means better delivery, fact. But when you're trying to attract an Aboriginal workforce and you can't keep them, then at what point do you stop and say, what have I done wrong here? What is going on very, very wrong here? Because if it's a great place, then I will tell Renee, who's my dearest friend, that this is a great place to work and she'll be here. You know, I will sit down with Stephen and say, hey brother, you should come over here, it's a great place to work. And bit by bit by bit, you'll have many of us coming from Aboriginal backgrounds. But if it's not, trust me, Deb and I will be telling people, don't work there. You're not okay there, leave, run quickly.
We work with a lot of companies with wraps and the like, and we'll talk to them about linking Aboriginal businesses into their supply chain, but then we also talk to them about their employment opportunities, and we get this response that, oh, we don't really have a lot of identified positions. It's like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, we don't. So no, what we're asking you is every time you have an opening in your company, at whatever level it is, send it over so we can get it out to our communities. Then you're getting more Aboriginal people with those skill sets applying for those positions, and hopefully some of them will be successful. It's this mindset that we have to change, and I'm really proud of the work that we do. I think the more that we work with the private sector and do that education piece, the better, because they're really just not aware, I guess, and we can do that nice cross-cultural education piece through the work that we do together and building those relationships.
And also making sure that the Aboriginal person put in that business is not the only person there,
Yeah.
and then is not given all
it's-
things Aboriginal to do. You know, the amount of times that I get emails that say, can you please write me an acknowledgement of country? Sorry, I didn't know that executive directors did that. Thank you. But people presume that you're in an Aboriginal job because you're an Aboriginal person. So I think it is that, it might be naivety, that you have to have an identified role in order to, employ an Aboriginal person. Best person for the best job.
Yeah.
And if they happen to be an Aboriginal person, that's what you do.
And changing that mentality, I think, as you were saying. I mean, that's the barrier, I think. Oh, you're an Aboriginal person, you can only do Aboriginal things or Aboriginal work. So, very, very interesting. You touched on before, Minister, about obviously having more Aboriginal people represented on boards, and I guess I'm keen to hear everyone's thoughts about, well, how do we get to those positions, and how, I guess, do we get regarded as substantive players in that sense, and stakeholders in the future development? So,
well, one of the things we're very focused on, I mean, I picked up the point before about saying part of the problem sometimes with government funding is that it goes into programs, and as David said before, then the programs stop, and then it all sort of, it's almost worse than if the programs were not put in the first place.
Yes.
So we're really conscious of that in this space. And so, for example, we had a program for strengthening business capability grants, which some of you might know about, under Closing the Gap, which funded numbers of projects, numbers of millions of dollars. But it was not just about sort of throwing some money in and then walking away. It was really identifying which ones were going to have long-lasting consequences. And so there's a wonderful business in Urbanville, for example, called Fire Law, and they provide cultural management, fire management services. And so it was about ensuring that they were supported, you know, with equipment and training and marketing, because they're a great business already. But we know that sort of support, $177,000, which for government is nothing, but it will take them to a whole new level. And that's what we've got to do, I think, as government. And I'm really interested in Deb and Claire's comments, but as government, I think that we've got to look at where can we get the best value add? Where can we have that multiplier effect where we can support businesses, organisations, ACCOs that are already succeeding to take them to the next level? Because the more, the stronger and stronger and stronger this whole sector can be, the more there'll be more board positions, the more there'll be people interviewed on you know, business television programs and so forth, and more it'll be seen, and therefore the pathway will become clearer.
Yeah, fantastic.
You're right, yeah,
Deb,
absolutely
please.
right, Minister. It's that, I guess that's the thing that we see a lot of duplication, and then it's wasted, the resource is wasted. But that example that you just gave is brilliant. You know, we need to look at growing those successful businesses, getting them to the next level. They are doing great things. They're employing more Aboriginal people, and it makes sense to support them. It's access to finance is one of the biggest issues. Things like ISO accreditation for a lot of our businesses, and there's just not enough resources for them. So how do we pool our thinking, and how do we inform government's expenditure and investment? And see it as an investment because we get a return.
Absolutely.
You know, how do we do that well? And the best way to do that well is to ensure that government is informed by, if we're talking business, by the business sector. And so, you know, we're constantly, I guess, crying out for opportunities to inform policy, to inform processes. And it's not about, look, everything's not rosy out there on the ground, but we need to be open to hear what's not working just as much as what's working well. And if we don't open ourselves to what's not working, then we're not going to maximise the opportunity. And I think that there is that real opportunity here in New South Wales, especially with the addition of the fifth, is to really get the economic piece right. But it means listening to the business sector. It means listening to leadership on the ground, which government is doing. And I think if we can do that and work together, then any investment that government has into Indigenous business growth will be well spent and get the returns.
It's a really good point. And one of the things I've found since coming into the ministry is that there's a lot of concern on the ground that we're investing money in programs that aren't particularly effective or may not be working, but there's concern, no, if we say they're no good, then the money will be taken away. So something that I'm trying to reinforce, and as is the Premier to his credit, is to say, no, we're not going to take away the money. We will still spend it on Aboriginal programs. We just want it to be spent the most effective way it possibly can be.
And investment in enabling, enablers, I think, look, I've travelled a lot right across Australia, and in every community there was leadership. There were solutions on the ground, economic solutions. They just needed to be enabled, you know, with resources and with capacity. You know, I get sick of, I guess, not sick of, but tired of hearing about our community organisations that just can't be successful in grant applications and tenders because they can't afford a tender write-up. You know, their competitors are, you know, they'll pay $25,000 for someone to write their tender. They can't compete with that. But if we look at, okay, how do we solve that? Well, maybe it's an investment into organisations that can build that capability at the grassroots level so they can compete for those contracts in our regions, in our communities, win that work and then employ our people so they're not leaving their communities. So I think there's a lot of conversations that we need to bring together. And look, you can't make everybody happy, but I think if we all are honest, then we will recognise that we're not putting enough into targeted capabilities where we need to. We do a lot of work with prime contractors, or we try and do a lot. Some are really engaging, others are still wanting to tick the box. They're not engaging early enough to have anything worthwhile come out for Aboriginal businesses on the ground. And then the other piece is, well, everything's too late. You know, by the time work packages are issued, it's too late for Aboriginal businesses to build their capabilities. So we always talk about this getting in front of that wave. If we can get in front of it, it might mean that we miss the current opportunity, but we're not going to miss the next one. And that's what's important.
And on that point, in terms of enablers in the tourism space and through land rights, several Aboriginal organisations have had successful land claims on facilities, one at Dubbo and one in Eden particularly. And targeting that money at the right time can make a huge difference. So those facilities are now in a state of decay because they didn't have the internal structure to move it to the level where it actually creates jobs and economic benefit back to the community. And the young fellow at Eden, for example, he was part of the land council. He was running his own business, and the land council kept going back to him and saying, "Oh, you know how this works. Can you do this?" And he said, "I have my own family to look after. I can't be doing both." And whereas if there'd been an intervention to actually fund someone to manage the business and get it off the ground, it would have employed probably 100 people. There's the cruise terminal at Eden. There was a whole pipeline of cultural tourism that could have been, not only the vision was there, but the capability wasn't. And the same as at Dubbo. I went out there, had a look. It used to be a wedding venue. They'd got it in a land claim. It's now sitting there ready for several years, ready to go, but they just can't get it to the next step. But each year it sits there, it needs greater investment to bring it back up to standard again. And they're the missed opportunity. I think cultural tourism is the greatest area in this country that we've missed out on, and that we just have to do better.
In the global New South Wales strategy, you know, it's not just the Opera House that people come here for. It's to learn about First Nations culture. You know, we have everything from white ochre pits to the spirit that lives at Bundjalung. We've got beautiful whale sculptures that are there at Kurnell. We've got, you know, Broken Hill. My goodness, if you go there and you go to Menindee or Wilcannia around those areas,
what Clark Webb's doing up in Coffs Harbour is incredible.
Amazing.
Yes.
But going back to the capability piece and the true co-design piece, there is one, if we can get it right together as government, the largest buyers of things, stationery alone, right? You would absolutely kill it if you opened up a First Nations business in stationery and could get that tender from government. But we do one of two things wrong.
We do have some.
Yes, but I mean,
yes.
on massive scale though, more. I always want more, Deb, you know me. But for me, it is about that co-design piece. If we choose a First Nations business and they're not ready, we could kill that business and we could shame that family. We had an interesting moment where we were looking at halls in school infrastructure, and we could go with the big end of town, and we knew that there was an Aboriginal company that wanted to tender for the halls. So we partnered them together. And we build capacity through them walking together. And now they're ready for these contracts that we have. We went to the meet the buyers pieces. We listened to what people had to say. We now have a local trade scheme for jobs that are under $50,000 to build these local trades. Not only that, we have a lot of asset maintenance to do. The previous Premier said we'll have a $0 base for anything that needs roof carpet paint, which is, you know, always a life cycle of the asset. So we are now building the capability of local Aboriginal people, so they don't leave country, to come in and fix that local school where their cousins go, where their kids go, where maybe they went, for them to come on site. And it also changes, we were speaking before, both ministers, about that negative discourse that occurs, that deficit model.
Absolutely.
I am old and cranky and sick of hearing the negative words that come with my people. I want to hear we have strength, resilience, self-determination, we are the longest living culture, too deadly. I want to hear those things. I don't want to hear that I'm vulnerable. I don't want to hear those words about me and my people. But every time we come up with a new scheme, it is to help those vulnerable people out there. You know, we're giving them a handout or a hand up. It is those words that we have to change, and we have to come from that positive framing in order to help people not feel ashamed of getting support for capability, you know, for them to lift up.
It's a challenge, right? Because even the term closing the gap
has
an implied negative connotation.
Yes.
And yet, there is a gap and we want to close it.
Yes.
So it's a really
But are we
interesting
stuck
challenge.
in the gap? Are we
But-
drowning
and
in
you're,
the
and you're
gap?
right. I'm
It's
such a
interesting,
believer that language is so
It is
important.
so powerful.
But
Absolutely.
when we often say, you know, when you talk about corporates or tier one companies, no one's thinking an Aboriginal business.
No.
Why not?
No one's thinking of an astronaut that's an
That's
Aboriginal
right, that's
person.
right.
Like,
So-
why not?
Yeah.
You know, we are everywhere. It's amazing. Sometimes you meet people and say, I've never met an Aboriginal person before, and you think, do you catch the train? Sure,
Do you live on the planet?
right? But
Now,
the idea that
I'm
we
sorry
can't,
to cut
sorry,
you
of
off. I'm
course.
very mindful of the time that we have to wrap
love
up.
you, Steve.
And no, I know. no, and I've actually had the easiest job because the conversation's been so organic that I've actually just had to sit here. Look, I guess if anyone in the audience has any questions, otherwise we will go to closing remarks very shortly. Does anyone have a question? Or
So I used to work in NGOs, and we would
Oh,
talk about
got
like asset-based community development and sort of strengths-based. I don't necessarily sort of. Oh, sorry.
Like in NGOs, we talk about asset-based community development, strengths-based, but I don't necessarily see that in kind of government language. You were talking about the importance of language. Is that something that everybody's kind of thinking about working in? Because I think if that's kind of coming from government as well, people will internalise that, kids will internalise that, and
absolutely.
it'll come up.
Sorry.
No, you go.
I think we are working in a piecemeal fashion. I think we all agree it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I had this diabolical plan that we'd go into universities and train every media person in the right language to use, so they would start putting out the stories in a very positive framing, because where we hear it mostly is the media, you know, and that frames how we speak in turn about certain issues and stuff.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. And framing, even in terms of values and motivations, and it takes a long time to turn around an oil tanker,
Yeah.
and we're turning it. And it's all about whether it's partnership or collaboration or what we see as our role in government, or the language and the models under which we assess programs and their success. They're changing, but there's more work to be done.
And I think we have to be strong. So people may have noticed that when there are cultural awareness programs run, particularly in public service, so that different departments are culturally appropriate, some in the media call that woke and try to put a negative spin on it to say, oh, we're creating division, that it's about, you know, creating two communities and these sorts of things. And that's why it's so important that we stay bipartisan.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
we have to drown out those voices.
Yes.
And we have to do what's right and what's needed, not what's a vote winner necessarily. So I think with the general community is a vote winner,
I agree.
but sometimes those loud voices try to shame. And one of the most criminal ones was when the AMA set up culturally appropriate waiting rooms in emergency, and basically had to stop because the media came down on them so hard that they were creating apartheid. And that's wrong, because when you listen to the stories, and I was with a family last week who lose young loved ones because of things that have happened, if those things had been in place, they wouldn't have happened.
True.
And we've got to be strong.
great. I'm just mindful, I think we don't have time for any more questions, unfortunately, but I do encourage you to ask our panellists afterwards. Look, I want to thank everyone for being here today and everyone joining us online, and all our panellists. It was such a wonderful discussion to listen to, and really about how we build capability and capacity in our communities is the challenge for us. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Good job.